In tonight's video, no, we're not looking at a TV, but this is the TV that the backlight was bad on. And I know some people have been critical saying I should change the backlight, but you know what? When you're watching a picture, you don't notice that there's a dark spot right here. You know, it's really tough to tell. For those that suggested just replace the light, well, the problem with replacing one backlight when you've got 12 and you put one light in that's brighter than the rest, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. Let sleeping dogs lie, I say. When you're watching a picture, you don't see it. I have today a Sony SLV585 VHS Hi-Fi VCR. And the guy that gave me this will recognize it when he recognizes his sticker. So this is a Sony VHS Hi-Fi. I haven't plugged it in or anything yet. This is one of two pieces that were given to me, and I'll be looking at the other one shortly. It's a plasma, a Hitachi 42-inch plasma monitor, and I will be looking at that shortly as well. But we're going to look at the VCR tonight. Let's plug it in. As you can see, the clock display lights up, which means that we don't have a power supply problem. Before I try loading a tape or anything on this, I'm going to pull the top off of it and just check for any mechanical problems. These Sonys, there was a lot of mechanical problems that could be attributed to dry grease. They also have a very nasty habit of breaking one of the loading gears. So we'll determine that pretty quick once I get the top off. A look down into the top reveals no mechanical problems that I can see. The guides aren't broken, which is good, right? If the gear below that breaks, if it was cracked or broken, one of these guides would be loose, but it's not. And I don't see any problem on the P6 guide caused by the lubricant drying up. And the capstan, or pinch roller, also is moving freely, so we don't have a problem with dry grease on that. So saying that, let's hook it up and we'll see whether we can actually play a tape on this thing. I'm just going to hook it up to my plasma here and try and play my color bar tape. So first things first, let's see if it'll turn on. That's a good sign. The machine turns on. Let's try loading a tape and see what it does. First tape I'll try and load is actually a broken tape, just to see if it's going to eat. Okay. Well, that's a good sign. Shall we see if it plays? It plays. What the heck? This machine appears to be working. And I was told it didn't work. But I hear something. I can hear an odd knocking sound. Listen. If you listen closely, you can hear a knocking, like a ticking sound. Listen to it. Tick, 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 tick. You can hear it? Let's try search. Ah! Ha ha! There's our problem. When I put it into search, you notice that the tape did not reverse. So I'm sure if I try rewind, it probably won't rewind. And it doesn't. And it's going to probably eat the tape now, which it is. So, we have a clutching problem on this in the mechanism, which is great. I want to take one of these apart. I've wanted to take one of these apart for a while, and now I have a reason for taking this mechanism apart. Because we're going to fix that clutching mechanism. I thought I could hear something ticking, and it's going to be in this gearing system. I'm just going to move the camera over a bit so you can see what I'm pointing at. So how the machine operates is the main capstan motor through a belt operates this midway assembly, and it operates a gear. There's a series of gears and clutches that operates the take up in the supply spool. And if we want to load this machine with no tape in it, all we have to do is just release the catches and pull the mechanism forward, and it will actually go down and load. Just like that. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put some black tape over the sensors so that I can actually operate the mechanism through its paces while the machine thinks that there's a tape in place. So this is a trick you can do on VHS machines. All it takes is just a couple pieces of black electrical tape, and all you need to do is just cover up the optical sensors that would be on the end of the tape in the sides here. Because how these machines operate, I think I got them. Oh, gotta get over a bit more there. How these machines operate is there's an infrared LED right down here. If I lift the machine up, you'll see it. Okay, and what it does is it shines a light beam. It shines a light beam across the mechanism, or through the tape, I should say. And when the tape, which we've got here, when the cassette is loaded, you'll see that there are holes on either side of the tape, one there and one over here. And this is where that light assembly shines. The first generation VHS machines actually used an incandescent light bulb that would burn out and had to be replaced. But there's a channel that goes through the cassette, and when that light is able to shine through the clear leader that's at the end of the tape, that's what tells the machine the tape's at the end. So if we block the light, we can fool the machine into thinking that there's a tape in it even when there's not. Now we can have some fun, because now we can see why this thing's not working. So here's play. You can see that the idler assembly here is driving the take-up spool, and if I go into reverse, now it's going to drive it, but it wasn't before. I have a feeling what's happening is this pendulum gear, which is right down in here, that moves back and forth when you go into reverse. See the pendulum gear there, right here, is sticking. I think that's probably what the problem is. And it doesn't go all the way over and engage in rewind. Let's take the mechanism apart on the bottom side. Just eject the... See, now it's working, but it definitely was not working when there was a tape in it. Now we can tell somebody's been in this machine because they've left half the screws out. There's a screw missing there, another one missing there, another one missing there. So they've only put in 3, actually there's 4 screws missing, there's another one there. They've only put in 3 of the 7 screws. Which is ridiculous, because when you're servicing these machines, you didn't even have to take the screws out, just loosen them. That's why there's slots, right? So you can just loosen the screws a bit, slide the cover back, and it'll come right off without taking the screws out. And we have to loosen this up off another couple turns here. But you didn't need to remove the screws. Just loosen them off and lift the back or lift the bottom off it. So I got to get under the board here. It looks like nobody's been into this. And the reason I say that is normally when someone works on one of these machines, we cut this tie strap and nobody puts it back on. So if that tie strap hasn't been cut, then chances are this machine's never been apart, because again, it's just one of those things that nobody ever bothers to put a new one in there once they remove it. And you remove it because it makes working on the machine so much easier. Then you can unplug the drum motor and just let the whole thing swing out. I want to take this whole board out. I can actually release there's a couple of clips down on this side that I can release. If I want to take the whole board right out, I just reach in here, pop those clips open with my finger, and then I can lift this entire board out without having to worry about I got one more. Got to unplug that little plug. Goes to the loading motor. This little plug goes to the top of the loading motor. Now I can take the sensor or the sensor board out. Something that quite often happens on these two is if the tape starts shutting down, it's not eating the tape, but it goes into a shutdown mode. Quite often what will happen is these little optical sensors, one of them will go bad. What they do is they detect the rotation of the tape spools, and if the tape spools stop turning, the take-up spool stops turning when it's in the forward direction, or the supply spool stops turning in the reverse direction, it'll put it into an emergency stop. So if your machine won't rewind, but the tape is moving, it's going to be the supply sensor, which is this one over here. This is the supply side because the machine's upside down. This is the take-up side. So if the machine won't rewind, it's going to be the supply sensor, and if the machine won't go into forward, it's going to be a take-up sensor. Now, if the supply sensor is bad, or even not registering properly, the machine will still play. It just won't high-speed rewind properly, and it won't reverse search, as a rule. But if the sensor's gone completely bad, it'll shut down. There's a little switch over here. Sometimes it needs to be cleaned too. That's the cassette. I think that's the cassette in switch. So when the cassette is in, it indicates that the mechanism is down. Okay, now let's take apart the mechanism. A very common point of failure on these type of mechanisms by Sony is the blue gear here. Very common will this gear crack, and when it does, it will not load. This is the one that operates the P3 guide, which is the one on the left side of the drum. Very common that part cracks. That part is getting hard to get now, but as you can see, this one looks like it's been replaced, because a lot of the original ones, it was a white gear, and they made a blue gear of an improved. The original one was more this color. They made a blue gear of an improved strength. So this one looks like this one may have been replaced in the past. What I want to get into on this is I want to take out the tooth belt and inspect the clutch assembly that's underneath here. So we're going to remove the tooth belt. So I'm just going to remove the screw and the spring. That'll allow the belt to go slack. Now I can remove the belt, and I'm going to remove this clip over here. And now I can remove the tooth belt and inspect the gear. This is what drives a midway gear. There's a clutch here that engages for fast forward and rewind, and changes the torque from the low torque mode for play, search forward and search backwards, to the high torque mode for full rewind. Just going to remove a couple screws here. I'm going to pull the front panel off. Now I can remove the front loading mechanism. The reason I have to do this is there's a cut washer I have to take off on the top to allow the mechanism to come apart. So we lift out the front loading mechanism. Now I can remove this plastic plate here. And this cut washer. And the cam gear. Or the pendulum gear, sorry. Cam gear's underneath here. Now, of course, now I can take the rest of the mechanism apart. I'm going to take that gear out of the way. Now the clutch assembly, which I unscrewed from below, can be examined, and we can check it out and see if there's any broken gears on here. and lubricate it while we're at it. So how the clutch assembly operates is that there's a cam on the main cam that operates these clutches and moves these up and down. And what quite often happens is the lubricant on the shaft dries out and the spring won't be allowed to push up the idler gear. But that's not the case here. I don't see any problem with this. There's good torque here. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this back in on the bottom. So it just goes back in like that. We have to pull the spring in place like that to drop it in place. And I'll put a couple screws in there to hold it back in place. For that matter, I can also put my toothed belt back on the shaft here. And put on the retaining screw. And put the spring back on like that. That pulls the correct amount of tension, and then put the lock screw back in place. And now we can flip the machine over and start working on the clutch assembly on the top. So this little gear here that came out, that actually fits onto this little idler there. This is the one responsible for rewind when the pendulum gear flips over. So this is the one I'm kind of concentrating on because it wasn't going into rewind. Pendulum gear goes back on like that. How it operates, if I can operate it by hand, is when the machine calls for torque. I have to work the mechanism through by hand. When the machine calls for torque, it transfers torque to this midway gear, which will go one way to drive the tape in the forward direction, and it'll go the other way to drive the tape in the rewind direction, and that's controlled by the cam, the main cam. See, let's walk it through its paces here by hand. Okay, now that the mechanism is in the loaded position, if I operate the capstan shaft, you'll see that it will drive, it will drive the take-up spool. Now if I reverse the motor, the pendulum gear goes the other way and it drives the supply side. That's how it works. The cam gear controls this idler assembly, pushes it up out of the way to disengage the clutch, and there's actually a spring on the bottom of the bracket which pushes it down. So points of lubrication on this chassis is these shafts here. We can lubricate all these. We'll put a drop of oil on all of these points just to keep them in good running condition, because if they stick, you end up with a problem. So just a bit of oil on each one of these points, but just a drop. We'll put our cut washer back on. Actually, I guess this is not a cut washer, this is a full clip. cut washer is a round washer with one little cut in it. This one's a full 3-way clip. It's a retainer. There's no cut in it at all. Replace the retainer back over top, line it up with the holes, and just snap it in place. It's held in place by 2 little clips, one on either side. Now we can replace the front loading mechanism and start to reassemble the machine. Must be a telemarketer calling. I just got yelled at not to answer the phone. When will she learn? I never answer the phone. Never. Okay, bottom board goes back on. I didn't bother to go through the timing of this mechanism unless somebody really wants to see that. I guess I could. I could unload the tape here by just turning the cam gear. If we look here, as I turn the cam gear, you'll see it operates the... See that it operates that clutch assembly. I didn't, on this video, I didn't go through the timing of the mechanism. I didn't think it was necessary because I have covered that on other videos where I've dealt with this machine. I've also done mode switch cleanings on this machine before, but maybe we'll do that as well today. So I'm just going to run this thing back, unload the tape. You'll see the mechanism as it's turning by hand. You'll see the tape guides retracting. Okay, and we're actually beyond the home position because there's holes that line up when you're in the home position, which is right there. That's home because there are holes that line up. If I take this apart, if I remove these retainer clips, and take this off, I can now really mess things up by pulling out the cam gear. You know, now I can really screw things up. Oh wow, now my alignment is way off. Right, you can see how the cam gear here controls everything, and here's our tape guides. Right, I've really messed this up. Right, if I could take these gears off, it doesn't matter because it's easy to put them back. When you line them up, what you do is you line up. There's some little timing marks on here. If you look on here, there's an arrow right there, and it points at that hole. There's also other holes. There's a hole here, and it lines up with a hole in the chassis directly below it. You can't see it from the camera angle, but there is a hole there in the reset position. That hole lines up with the hole that's below there. So if I were to, when they're done at the factory, they're actually done with pegs, little pins that they put through, and it holds them in place. Machines put these machines together. But that hole lines up with a hole in the chassis. This one here lines up with another hole right here in the chassis. The camera angle doesn't show it, but if you look straight down, this hole that looks offset on camera is actually directly below, as you can see. Right? So when that hole lines up with that hole, and this hole lines up with the hole below it, as you can see, screwdriver right through the chassis, we are in correct time. I have to make sure that the main guide here is pulled back though before doing that, because the tape tension arm, of course, is in the play mode, in threaded mode. So before we bring the guides back into alignment, we have to pull this lever back to pull, you can see the tension arm. We pull that back and then bring the guides back. They are what hold that in place. As you notice, if I allow them to rotate, you'll see that this will swing into position. So we pull that back, rotate our guides back to the stop position or the unloaded position. As far as our main cam goes, it's the same. We have a series of gears on here that line up, and there's holes. Now I could take all these apart, maybe I will. We'll take off that. I'll take off this gear again, just to go through the alignment procedure, because I'm a sucker for punishment and I really have nothing better to do than take these machines apart. I won't even bother taking that clip off this time, but I could have. Okay, I can take this gear off. Okay, there's our mode switch. It's also got a cam on it as well. I can take the mode switch out to clean it. Aren't these fun to work on? Lift the mode switch out. As you can see, there's a cam on there as well. Let's take the mode switch apart so we can clean it. There's our mode switch. And I'm going to clean it with neutral on this one, only because I was supposed to be doing a demo of Deoxit, but the product that was being offered to be sent to me for evaluation has been held up in customs. So we'll just give it a shot of cleaner. There we go. And we'll wipe that out with an official generic brand cotton swab. Just clean the contacts. As you can see, they are dirty. Just a little bit of oxidation. And we'll do the same for the contacts over here. Now we can put the mode switch back together. And now we have to figure out what's our correct timing. Well, how do we know our mode switch? How do we know we're in the right position? Well, there's marks on here. We want to set our cam gear where there's a timing mark here, kind of pointing at this little arm here. And we place the cam gear in place, or the mode switch in place. We want to move this lever over so that it drops into place. Now you can see that this, when the mode switch rotates, it operates this lever. There's a timing mark, it's hard to see, but there is a timing mark on here. There's a little hole right there. If I can get the camera zoomed in. There's a little hole right on the edge of the gear, and it's going to point at a timing mark on this other gear. So when we drop this gear in place, there's another little timing mark right there. You can see it. A little arrow right there. That little arrow is going to point at the hole in the edge of the gear. So you line them up, and it'll also line up with, there's a hole back here that's going to line up with another hole in the chassis underneath. So there's another hole right there. That's all going to line up. So when I line them up, and snap it down in place, you'll see that there's a hole right here that you can look down through this slide cam. There's another hole here that looks down through another hole in the chassis. If I were to stick something through there, like a piece of wire, for example, just because that's all I have. If I stick a piece of wire through here, it'll go down through the hole in the chassis. If I stick it through here, it'll go down through the cam plate and through a hole in the chassis. And if I stick it down through here, it'll go down through the hole in the chassis. So now this is lined up. Now I can put this cut washer back on to hold that gear in place. When I move the slide cam, you'll see that everything moves as it's supposed to. Take it back to the aligned position. We bring these gears back into position. So I'll do that again with the camera a little wider so you can see what's happening. As I move the main cam slide, you'll see that these two cam gears, one that's part of the mode switch assembly, I guess I should put those screws in to hold that in place so it doesn't move. Okay, you'll see that the cams here and the levers move. And that's the position there when that's eject, when it moves back to eject the tape. That's the normal resting position there. In the normal resting position, our holes line up there, and that hole lines up with that little mark on this gear, which it is. So now we're ready to put the main cam in. The main cam's got a series of gears on it as well that line up, or a series of holes that line up. And you can see through the chassis, you look through these holes here and you'll see where they go. So basically, if you look through these holes here, you will see the pins for these levers. So you'll see the tops of these levers here through these little cutouts. So as I drop the gear back in place like that, I'm going to rotate it until I can see the three tops, which you can't see from this angle, but if I move the camera, you'll see what I'm looking at. If we look straight down, you will see the tops of those pins. You see down here, you'll see the three tops of the pins that are lined up. So now we know we're correct. So once we've got it lined up, we bring back our loading gear and it will just drop right into place. Just like that. Now we can put this piece back on. Might help if we put it on the right way. Goes on like, I think it's like this. Yeah, goes on just like that. And our three cut washers on top to hold this flimsy mechanism together. We can hook in the drive gear, the tooth belt drive gear again. Hook the spring back around there. And replace the screw. Mechanism is now back together. If I start to wind it forward, you'll see that it will actually start the threading cycle. Now we can put the circuit board back in place. Replace all the screws. Screws in place. Plug the drum motor back in without bending the pins. Flip the unit over. Plug in the loading motor and then reattach the two connectors that we undid to take the board out. When we're putting the front panel back on, be sure to open the cassette door so that it doesn't get trapped on the wrong side of the lever that opens it. Okay, first thing we want to do on this mechanism before we put a tape in is we want to put it through a dry run. So remember, I've still got my tape in place over my end sensors. So I'm just going to force it to load a tape by releasing the little catches on either side and pulling the mechanism in. And then it will load. and it'll try and go into play because it doesn't detect that there's a record tab, so it thinks it's a pre-recorded movie. So you can see our take-up spool is turning. If I go into fast forward or forward search, it's spinning at a fast rate. If I go into reverse search, it'll go into a supply side starts. If I hit stop, if I want to go into fast forward, remember this machine's got tape sensors, so it's got to determine whether the tape's actually moving. So if I put it into fast forward, it's actually going to expect that the supply spool is going to turn as well. So put it into fast forward, I have to actually make it think that the tape is moving, and then it'll go into full fast forward. Same with rewind. If I turn it into rewind, I have to let the machine know that the spools are actually turning. Stop. Now I'm going to eject it, but I forgot to take the tape off first, so we'll just reload it here so that I can peel off my electrical tape. Now the machine will figure out that there actually isn't a tape in it, and it will eject it. It should anyway. There we go. Now we can put a tape in it and see if it actually plays. And of course it does. And unlike before, when I put it into reverse search, it's not going to eat my tape now because we fixed the problem that this machine had. Go into full rewind, it'll reverse a bit first, and then it'll go into full rewind. Same with fast forward. And then back into play. Now, we need to make sure that this machine actually can record. So, if I hit eject, it better not eat the tape. Of course it won't, because I fixed it. Okay, let's hook up a source. I gotta find an analog source here. That shouldn't be a problem around here. Let's hook up a source and we'll make a recording. I've got a tape here. I think I can record on, well, I could probably record on that other tape. But this one here is probably just fine for recording. And you see what it'll do? It'll actually advance the leader. Is this tape I can record on? I think this is it's got color bars on this tape. Let me hook up a source. It just so happened that I have a cable here that I should be able to get something off of. I have my own in-house signals that I can use for testing. In this case, it's my video. And I'll just hit record. We'll test it in both the SP and the EP speed. I believe there's a switch on here. Yes, there is. I don't need the remote for that. So SP speed is recording. Let that record for a few seconds. And then we'll switch it down to the EP speed. Oops. I have to stop the recording. So let me pause it. And then I can change it to EP and continue recording. That should be enough. So stop it, go back into play, and I'll reverse search. There's our playback. Perfect. It's SP speed. In a second we'll see it switch down to the EP speed. This is an SLV585, by the way, in case I forgot to tell you guys, but it'll be on the title there. But there we go to the EP speed. Beautiful. Works perfect. Love it. This was a game donated by one of my my viewers that paid $15 for it, and it said, that's the end of the recording, and it said no exchanges on electronics. But you know what? It didn't work, and now it does. So we've saved another unit from the recycle bin, kept another VCR working now for a few more years. Hey, we're going to need these machines as people have got lots and lots of VHS tapes that they've recorded over the years, and I mean, some stuff people aren't going to be interested in. If it's just a TV show or something that someone's recorded, like, you know, toss it, right? But if you've got your kids playing hockey or football or, you know, dance recitals or school plays, or you're just your kids growing up, birthday parties and stuff, and it's on a VHS tape, you can't buy VHS machines anymore. So we need to keep these machines running as long as we can, so that people that have got their home videos recorded on VHS or 8mm or any of the other tape formats, so we have a chance to get those recordings that are important to people transferred over to a digital format, either to DVD or to a hard drive or a memory stick. That's why we keep these machines running, because there are millions upon millions of tapes out there, and a lot of people have trashed these machines, and then all of a sudden they find a tape and they, oops, I need a machine to play it on. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one. And just to pan this over here, here's this clock that I love the steady shot on this thing. I let go of the camera and it just moves on its own. There's that clock that was sent to me by the IC station people. I've got it running on a battery, and I've had it running for like a week on this old battery. I'm gonna leave this thing run and just see how long it'll take for this to discharge this old battery that came out of a UPS. So we'll see how long it takes to discharge. But hey, it's keeping fairly accurate time. So we'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.